You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it. You felt it.
The point is to understand who you really are. Humans are now hackable animals. To hack a human being, he has to understand that human better than he or she understands themselves. Facing enormous challenges, unprecedented challenges.
Welcome to the Spellbreakers Podcast, helping you transcend psyops, mental spells, and even reality itself, with your host, Donny Spellbreaker. Hey guys, it's your boy Donny Spellbreaker. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Spellbreakers Podcast. So I've been getting a lot of questions on why I left the city and how I live off grid. I had done a interview with Adam Green last week that's on Rumble, and it came up quite a bit, both in the chat and afterwards. So I thought I would make a stream about my decision to leave the city and to discuss it openly, talk about both the pros and the cons, and hopefully it'll help you decide if it's something that you want to do in your own life. So, some background about myself. I grew up in a small suburban town. Wasn't lots to do, and we were usually bored out of our minds. And so by the time we got into high school, we were getting up to all manner of shenanigans. A lot of my friends ended up becoming addicted to drugs, and actually 5 of them have since died. I was lucky, though, in that I worked manual labor for my family from quite a young age, and this helped give me a lot of life skills, and in addition, it really kept me out of a lot of trouble, especially in the summers, when a lot of my friends were off doing drugs and partying all day. I was working, lifting bricks for a living, making an income. And it was great because when the time I was 19, I was able to start my own business. But I definitely grew out of that town after a while. And in fact, I was in a motorcycle accident where I almost died. And I thought that I was being protected by God. And it was something that really snapped me out of my stupor and my small bubble. And I had made the decision to go to university. And almost none of the other friends in my circle did so. And that was totally fine. A lot of them stayed in with the trades, which is obviously great. And in fact, I recommend taking up a trade over going to university. But for me, it was a very exciting experience to challenge myself beyond just physical labor. It is something that I thought I never had the capacity to do. And going through university was a really large growth experience for myself. When I had graduated, it felt like such a sense of achievement, and I had ended up actually co-founding a robotics startup with some friends that I had made in university. So I did that for a couple years, and we had successes. We had several sales. We raised some funds. But after a few years, we actually ended up running out of money, which is very common for a startup. And so I decided to build my career and to move to the city. And I had several mentors that said to really get the skills I was looking to get, to work at a startup, because they were very much the cutting edge, especially at the time, in terms of learning new skills, new processes and procedures. And yeah, so that's something I decided to take on. I basically got rid of my apartment, moved out with my roommate, and sold a lot of my stuff, and got in my decrepit van and moved to the city. I basically figured, I'll figure it out as I go. It should be pretty easy. And it definitely was not. So when I first got into the city, I looked about getting both a job and an apartment at the same time, and I really don't recommend that, especially in Canada where there's a chronic housing shortage and the labor market is very, very tight, especially if you haven't had an actual job for years before. So I basically lived out of my van for a while, and I would find sublets for a month. So people who were away from their apartments, I ended up renting their place for a month. And I was lucky that when I first moved in, I had some friends who worked in the film industry, and they ended up giving me jobs working on these movie sets. And I was the lowest of the low of the movie sets, just to be clear. But it was a ton of fun seeing that entire industry working hard, hitting on actresses, whether on break, then getting pissed off, getting flipped out on by the directors for hitting on the actresses. But it was a really great time, and I was really thankful for that. It gave me enough money to pay my rents. And then I worked in a kitchen. I was acting as a runner at a jazz bar. I would run food basically from the second floor of the kitchen down to the wait staff. And it was actually there where I met Jordan Peterson and his daughter Michaela before he became super famous. But it was a grind. Every day, as soon as I got home from work, I was applying to 20, 30, 50 jobs a day, doing personalized cover letters, all this stuff. And I applied for months and months and months before I got my first interview. And it took way longer to even land my first job, but more on that later. So my initial impressions when I first moved to the city, especially being a small town kid, was incredible excitement. To me, it was a massive period of growth in my life. The city felt like, the whole world was there for the taking, that you could really become someone and be someone. You're this lowly guy working nights for just over minimum wage, and you see guys driving around in Lamborghinis with hot chicks on their arms. You really had that sense of the hustle, right? That you can grind and you can make whoever you want to be in terms of redesigning your life. And it was very, very exciting. And it was the same dynamic with a lot of my friends. Everybody was on the grind, working late hours, trying to move up. They were all hustling, right? Trying to grow rapidly and stand out in a sea of many thousands and thousands of people. And I got really into the nightlife in the social scene. I met some friends there, really great guys, and we started going out, sometimes 4 nights a week. Even on weeknights, we'd, finish work around midnight and we'd go bar hopping until 4 a.m. and wake up and do the same thing again. And it was really exciting, Living in Toronto, especially at that time, was incredible. There was endless live music venues, and there were always things to do, and it was just great. Yeah, and I ended up starting a band there, and we were playing shows all over the city, starting to get a bit recognized. It was just tons of fun, and I wouldn't change that period of my life for anything. The culture very much felt like a challenge and a hustle in itself, right? When you first come to the city, you feel like you're on the lowest of the totem pole. And there's always this kind of subtle pull to be somebody and be more than you are. And that's a lot of the culture. Everybody is kind of posturing to come across as more than themselves or larger than life. And it's something that at first was very exciting, but as I will speak about later, I became to kind of resent. Everyone always acted like they were almost their own personal brand that they were launching and revamping at any time, But for a while, it was really fun, and I'd recommend everybody, if you're young and you haven't experienced that yet, well, it's great. And then also my career was going quite well. It took a while. I actually worked my way up at a startup. I ended up doing fairly well, and then, as startups do, they were struggling for cash, and they ended up firing about 40 people in one day. It was a total bloodbath, and a lot of tears, but I was happy to get out of there because, honestly, it was a very toxic and cultish environment. So I was just kind of chilling for a bit, and eventually I landed a better gig that paid way better and gave me a lot of potential for growth. And so I ended up working on the financial district in Toronto, And that was a scene in itself. You start hanging out with the big wigs or bigger wigs. We were going out for scotches on lunch and dinner and clubs, and it was a really exciting period. I loved it. It was really great. But more and more, I've always been an entrepreneur, and I found the whole grind and the politics really, really tough. I always excelled at all the jobs that I had, but I always found the politics within them was what kills you. There's usually people in middle or upper management who always want to try to control you, and that's ultimately what made me decide to quit my job and start my own business. So about the 3-year mark living in the city, things started to kind of all coalesce for me in terms of wanting a change. So more and more, even though I was making good money, it really started to feel like a mouse wheel, where I was making nice cash, more cash than I had ever made before in my life, but it felt impossible to really get ahead. And guys, this is before the mass inflation and, COVID and all of that. But even then, right? Like, I would get an Uber 4 or 5 days a week to work, at least one way, get a super fancy fourth wave coffee in the mornings, get lunch with coworkers, go out for drinks after work, then you go to a club after drinks. You're spending thousands of dollars a month kind of living that lifestyle. And while, you don't have to do that living in the city, to me, that was the really exciting part of it. And so that was something I really came to terms with, that even though I was making all this money, I just saw that there was almost no way that I could really get ahead. And so I just really saw it as a trap. And more, I was starting to become aware of how vapid the culture was. I had been making all of these friends, but, as time progressed, I realized that it is actually very hard in the city, at least for me, to really make good friends. Friends that I really trust. Friends that I really know have my back. I was meeting a lot of really cool guys who were doing cool stuff, and, we'd go out for drinks for a few hours, and that was great, but nothing really progressed beyond that. People are always so busy doing so many things that it's very hard to really form those deeper bonds. And that was totally fine. I never had any judgment towards those people. It's just, for me, growing up in a small town, my friends were, very sacred to me. Having close friends that I can really trust and rely on and really have that connection with was really important. So that was starting to add up. And also, I just felt like a lot of people were posers. Growing up in a blue-collar background, working hard in manual labor my whole life, I could see the effect on men who never had that experience. Now, I don't think that you're not a true man if you don't, work a construction or heavy job. But at least having that experience in life, I think, really humbles you to hard work. It gives you a base level of skill sets and competency, as well as, I would say, real confidence that you know how to handle yourself in situations. But when I saw other men, a lot of them, they just felt very effeminate to me. And, a lot of times my gaydar would actually go off. I had to actually recalibrate my gaydar for a lot of the guys I was meeting. But don't get me wrong, I think the city gets a bad name. There's a lot of really cool people there doing really great stuff, and it's not like they're all woke softies. It isn't the case, right? But I just felt that a lot of people really were having to posture and try to be somebody they're not, instead of just really owning who you are. And that's something I've always tried to live by, is just being genuine to who I am and always being myself. And I would remember, chatting people up on the subway, and I remember a lady once saying, you're not from around here. Like, you're talking to me and you're smiling out of the blue. Like, nobody talks to each other. And in fact, that's how I actually met a lot of ladies at the time, is just striking up conversations. And people really liked it, but it very much isn't part of the culture. A large part of the culture, especially when living so close in such close proximity to so many people, is putting up walls, right? There's a lot of craziness. There's a lot of insanity. It's constant hustle bustle. And so a lot of people always have these walls up that you have to break down. And that's a key part of city culture, which I really struggled with. And then more and more, I was just becoming more based, and I wasn't even really realizing it. But I would just notice at parties and stuff, I would just say basic things, and people would get really upset. I call them micro triggers. And I just thought that was really bizarre, because I wasn't trying to really even be political. I would just say, things that I think are total common sense, and you would have one person chirp up, and because they chirped up, other people would white knight. And I just thought the whole thing was so exhausting, and I just less and less wanted to be around these types of people. And again, to be totally clear, not everybody in the city is like that, right? Even in Toronto, there are a lot of really great, interesting people. So I think the city can get a bad rap. And I think, if you were to total it all up, most, the cities are like that. But I would say there's a lot of individuals who are really talented, really creative, and totally flourish in the city. And more, I started to really get into canoeing. And this is something that actually really changed my life. And it's something I'd like to get into another episode. But my friends and I, we started doing these epic, 1-2 week canoe trips, really pushing our boundaries in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes we've been close to death or stranded or had our boat ripped up and had to repair it with tree sap, or we wouldn't have made it home. A lot of crazy experiences there. But more and more having those experiences, I started to really get a sense of calm and peace whenever I was out in nature. Going a week or two without any technology was something that felt like a revolutionary act, and it would just totally rewire my brain to be really calm and collective. And I had noticed each time we would go back into the city, it was almost like an immune response, in that I felt so anxious, and I just had to stay inside for the first 2-3 days after a trip, because I was just so zenned out being in the bush, and then it was just this total switch. And so more and more I was starting to feel that, man, I really need to be in nature more. And obviously that was very antithetical to the city. I was lucky enough to live near High Park in Toronto, which was the largest park in the city. Had a lot of nature and, old growth trees. So it was something I spent every day in. And I think that was the biggest saving grace. And by this time I had actually quit my job and started my own business totally online. That was a whole experience in itself. Something, guys, if you're interested, I'm happy to speak more about in terms of giving tips and advice for how you can do that as well. But yeah, adding up all of these things, I really started to see the writing on the wall, that the city wasn't as good as it used to be for me. I lost a lot of the shine. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and COVID was totally insane. I don't know how many of you guys were living in Toronto at the time or in a major city, but it felt like a modern day witch trial where everybody lost their mind, or, LSD in the water or something. It was totally insane. Where I used to hike from my park, they ended up fencing off the entire park. Yes, the entire park. It was like 30 square blocks or something. They fenced it off and had police officers there, so you couldn't walk in for periods of time. Every time you would walk and say hi to people, they would cross the street and not talk to you. You would stand even 5 feet away from somebody and they would totally lose your minds. Mind you, I wasn't wearing masks, and I felt like the only person in the city not wearing masks. And funny enough, nobody ever freaked out on me, but you could tell people really did see you as a plague rat. That was an incredibly difficult time to live through. And I know many of you who lived in cities who understand what was going on probably felt the same. And, something I would love for you guys to comment below on is, I always wondered, was it harder to know that COVID was largely propaganda nonsense over being afraid that it was literally the plague and the apocalypse? I really wondered that, just as an aside. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But yeah, I just, after a year of COVID, where they would lock everything down and then stay-at-home orders, which I never listened to, and then they would they had 5 waves. I just couldn't take it anymore. It just felt like a massive prison that I needed to get out of. All of the things that made the city great were totally gone, and all the things that made it bad, high prices, absolute crazy people everywhere, really sealed the deal for me. So I decided to GTFO, and I realized that I wanted to be close to nature and in an area where there were no mandates and away from psychos. So, funny enough, I actually thought I would either go to rural Quebec or Alberta. And man, I'm really glad I ended up deciding on Alberta. So what I did was I found a horse ranch that actually had a spare apartment, and I was lucky to be able to work for a portion of my rent. And so that was all lined up. I had met a lady here, luckily enough, who helped out a bit, and then basically it was just the decision to pull the trigger. And so I ended up selling all the things I could, and then finally I just left the rest out by the curb, loaded up what I could in my pickup truck, and I drove across all of Canada, which was about 3,200 kilometer drive, or 1 million miles for you Americans. And that itself was incredibly fun. I'd never done the trip across Canada. And guys, if you're Canadian and you haven't done the trip, I recommend everybody do it because it was amazing. I ended up, camping on old logging roads. I ended up finding an abandoned trailer park where that was super sketchy that I ended up having to kind of flee from. But anyways, it was a really great experience. And welcome to Alberta. Now, Alberta was the first to lift all the mandates, and that was really great. And it was total culture shock in a lot of ways. Alberta really had a spirit of freedom and of leaving you alone. But it was very different, and I stood out like a sore thumb. And that was something that was, really challenging to do. In the country, and, everybody romanticizes it, but guys, there's a lot of cons to it. So I would say the main cons to living in the country are, one thing is isolating, right? When you go from very high density population to one where your closest neighbor might be a kilometer or 2 away, that can be very challenging. And it is very much a culture shock, right? They go a different pace in their life. They have different priorities. People have usually never heard of, what you're doing if you've worked for startups and stuff. It seems weird and effeminate. It really takes a while to break into the culture, right? People were always very friendly, to be clear. My 3rd day, I got stuck in a ditch because it was an ice storm. And within 2 minutes, the first car stopped, and it happened to be the local pastor. He pulled out some chains, didn't say anything, and pulled me out. It was amazing. People are super willing to help, super friendly. It's just hard to really build connections. There's way less people. They're farther apart, so it's harder to actually meet people. And then also people who are farming and building families, they're very busy. There is a bit more of a conservatism in terms of letting new people into your life in here, which I think is a good thing. In the city, it's very easy to meet people and go out for drinks, but you don't really get to know them. Whereas out here, I find people really size you up, right? And they slowly let you in over time if they trust you and they see that you're a good person. So that's something to really consider. As well, you have to drive everywhere here, and that's something that can be very challenging, right? So we drive about 25 minutes to get our groceries because now we live on a ranch off-grid in the middle of nowhere. And it's really fun, but I don't want to totally romanticize it in that it comes with a lot of challenges. At first it was totally isolating for me. I had almost no friends here, and especially working remotely, I think a lot of people here make friends through work, right? And that was something that was really challenging for me to do. But yeah, what I would say is, in terms of the pros and benefits of it so far, are that the people here really are real people. They are really honest, ethical, moral, great people. Here, People are a lot more tuned into nature, and we're a lot closer to nature. And that's something that makes me feel really comfortable. Like now we can, just on the weekend or even during the day, if we have enough time, we can pop into the mountains and go for endless hikes in the mountains. It's incredible. We can find so many different little places, near a river or a lake or in the woods that are just ours, where we can be there all day without anybody to bother us. And that's something that is non-existent in the city, right? Having that ability to have your own little spot where you can hang out at. People here are really fun, just in their own ways, right? They do a lot of outdoorsy stuff and a lot of ATVing and dirt biking and hunting and shooting, which is incredible. And it's something that I've really put myself into in terms of getting into myself. And it's helped me really appreciate the land a lot more. Yeah, it's just a general sense of freedom. Like when we're in the middle of nowhere, it just feels like you can do anything. There's no one there really caring what you do. And the people who you do see very much have a culture of, I leave you alone, you leave me alone, and I really appreciate that. There's not really a lot of nosy bodies, some of them, there definitely are there, but it's a lot less, and the impact is almost non-existent. And this for me has provided a lot more clarity in my life. So in the city, everything feels so complex, right? The jobs you're doing are so often so obscure and so complex that it's very hard to explain. Even getting around in the city, it takes a lot of work and effort and meeting people, and everything is just so complex, and we're so far removed in cities from the actual reality of things. You have no idea where your food comes from, how the transit system operates, or any of the stuff. You're just kind of floating around having experiences. Whereas out in the country, it really grounds you as a person, because a lot of the bullshit of the city just doesn't fly, right? You can't say that you're capable of doing something and not get found out very quickly here. You very much out here need to be self-sufficient as well. Everyone, even in their vehicles, will have, spare jerry can of gas, enough survival equipment to last them a few days, food, water. Maybe not everybody, but most people, right? Everybody has that attitude of self-sufficiency and resiliency, right? Of being prepared for almost any situation. And that's something that in the city, I never did. Even the winter, I could leave my place in a small sweater and hop on a bus to a train to where I needed to go. Whereas out here, it's like you always have to be prepared for the worst at any time. The winters are super harsh. You can go hours without any cell service. There's cougars and grizzly bears all over the place. A lot of the roads are unmaintained, and if you take logging roads, they get really sketchy, especially in the winter. You have to really be over-prepared all of the time. And the culture really reflects that. A lot of people value competency and being able to help others and to prepare. And it's really, really great, because in the city, it was just how much clout can you do? How much can you hype yourself up? How much can you pretend to be somebody important? Whereas here, it's just very plain. Can you help me solve this problem? Can you grow your own food? Can you get out of a ditch in a snowstorm? And I really like that. In the city, you didn't really have a lot of space to call your own, that you can be creative and productive and do things. And so the culture of the city is really to just do as many experiences as possible. See the next hottest band or this weird restaurant that's inside bubbles. And you would just consume and you wouldn't really get anything back. And I've seen my morals and values really change from moving out here. Now we farm. We've put in our own massive vegetable garden that was bigger than my house in Toronto by a wide margin. We raise chickens and we work with our friends to raise animals. Every morning we get our own eggs, and we've made friends with a dairy farmer to get our own milk. We'll spend entire weekends just canning and preserving. And we really like giving them out to people. In return, they give things that they're making to us. And that becomes a form of social capital. Instead of just buying things at a supermarket, you're getting some of the best quality stuff and you're trying to give the best quality stuff. It's a total different vibe and it's really awesome. And I've created a life that's a lot more simple and rewarding. A lot of the modern struggles I think that people feel in the city are just gone, and you're free to kind of be yourself and be more of a real human being. I remember the first 2 or 3 months it took for me to fully unwind from living in the city. It was interesting. It hit me one night. I was just sitting around where I lived at the time, faced out of a beaver dam, where there's this family of beavers just like making a dam all together. And I was just sitting there for like 2 hours on a Friday watching them. And then all of a sudden it just hit me like a wave of calm. I'm like, whoa, I have nothing else to do right now. This is my life. I'm literally just hanging out, looking at beavers. There's nobody to call back. There's not some stupid party I'm about to go to of people I don't even like or care about. Just the beavers. And it was really great. And so I would put that as very much a pro of living in the country, if that's something that you want. There's a lot less going on in terms of things you can buy or consume, but there's so much more to see. And for me, I found being in nature to be what we're supposed to be doing, and everything else, it just seems to be some distraction to totally manipulate us into being good, mindless consumers of crap. So for people who ask, should I live in the city? Should I live in the country? Because right now a lot of people, I think, are exiting the cities and really starting to think about living this type of lifestyle. And so I would just be honest about yourself, what you really want. Are you okay having to drive 20-30 minutes to go to a grocery store? Are you okay with your only entertainment being a little bowling alley or a little dive bar with a bunch of rednecks who play crappy music now and again? You got to be honest with yourself. Are you going to be okay with that or not? It very much is a personal growth, because I've learned to be way happier with way less stimulation and input. And that's another benefit, is that many of the temptations of the city just weren't even there for me anymore, like Uber Eats or going chasing women or going clubbing and all of this stuff, drinking tons. Because it's not even there, it just wasn't even a factor or a temptation for me. So I really learned to adapt to having fun with my own surroundings. For me, I go for hikes every day and I love it. And I started kayaking, and during the summer I was doing that like 3-4 days a week. It's been amazing, right? But if that's not really the life you want, if you still need that hustle and bustle, don't do it because you won't like it, and you also need to be prepared to struggle a little bit. It's harder meeting new people. You'll stand out like a sore thumb at first. The best thing you can do is try to join groups and clubs that are doing things that you like and try to meet people that way. It's different if you have families, because people are highly family oriented here. So it's funny, just having a family opens up tons of doors for you in terms of networking and community events and stuff. And I also think it's kind of a signal that they can trust you and that you're not a total weirdo. And it's so funny, it's the exact opposite in the city. Almost nobody was having kids, and even the idea of wanting kids actually seemed radical. Whereas out here, they think you're total weirdos if you don't do it. Now, if you're thinking of living in the country, I would just really ask people to be honest with themselves about their philosophy and what they really want out of life. With the city, there is a lot more economic opportunities. There's a lot of potential for you to have a lot more fun and to grow and to become, multi-millionaire, whatever, If that's really what you want to do and you love the grind, stay in the city. I would encourage people who feel that the city is a trap, which I believe that they are, at least for me, to really consider this type of lifestyle and to know that it's not as hard as you think to transition. The actual steps involved aren't that difficult. Find a place far away, a rental somewhere that you can live at. You start there and you work your way up. And also in terms of career, I would just like to encourage people that I think it's never been easier than ever to start your own business and do your own thing and also do that thing online. And so, again, if this is something you guys are interested in, I'd love to talk about on another episode. Just let me know. But yeah, basically to conclude, this is why I left the city and now I live on an off-grid ranch in the middle of nowhere. For me, it's been the best decision I've ever made, but it hasn't come without a lot of challenges. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and tune into the next episode. Thank you.